What impediments has the country experienced in terms of trade since the president invoked the Disaster Management Act and, of course, the subsequent lockdown thereafter in March?
Okay, so what we've seen is both a decline in the imports and exports of the country. So the exports, we've had a whole lot of the ports closed, and we've also seen the transport to the ports not being operating. So it meant that, some of the guys who are still able to stay open haven't been able to export. And what we are hoping is that, particularly on the mining sector, because that is our areas of largest exports, that and autos, that we start seeing those products being able to open up and being able to export as soon as possible.
Yes. Well, if that does happen, what about in terms of the recipient countries? What are their rules currently? Is it business as usual in terms of trade and imports and all of that?
So that's the key issue. So for China, who opened up already before us, they will be looking for a lot of the commodities and minerals that we export, although demand and price is down. So we are going to face a lot of challenges on that. And then the autos is the big question because we export a lot of our cars to Europe and to America. And what we will see is the decline in those markets until they open up completely. So that is going to have an impact on car exports, but also the components that we produce that are also exported, that's going to be severely impacted. And then on the import side, we're also going to face some challenges because we import a lot of intermediate goods that we need for our own production. So if we aren't able to bring those products in, then it means certain companies that can open aren't going to be able to get their raw materials.
Of course, because of the fear of the spread of the virus, no doubt the government will ensure that those sectors that really don't lend themselves to social distancing and all of that kind of thing don't open up immediately. But surely, if in those instances where they do lend themselves, it would make sense, particularly from a foreign exchange point of view, for the government to push for as much exports as possible in those sectors that can afford to create an environment where there's social distancing.
Yes, that's absolutely critical. I mean, there has to be a balance between what happens on the economic side and on the health side. I mean, we can't just do one at the expense of the other. So it's how we get that balance right so that when firms open up, they take all the health and safety measures. And I think already there's been a lot of industries that have put together an industry-wide plan on what firms need to do in their industry. I've seen already a couple of industry plans, and I think those kind of things make sense because it means workers feel confident going back into the workplace knowing that their employer has got all the necessary equipment and all going to be disinfected between shift changes and things like that. So those things are very important. Where there's people in close proximity, there's going to have to be a different solution. And I think the mines have come up with some solutions around that, particularly with people going down in lifts. They're going to have to find ways around social distancing on that.
Yeah. Are you concerned going forward? Because, of course, economies can decide to ease the lockdowns and so on, but this is going to have a psychological impact on all of us. We're going to be wary to go into markets and so on. And we're hearing about policies of some countries, for example, rice exporting countries deciding to hold back on product. Perhaps they're worried that they won't have enough products down the line because of social distancing rules and not being able to work in those sectors. Are you worried that there's going to be an element of protectionism going forward for the interests of people's nations?
Yes, we are particularly worried about those kind of things. And, certain industries are going to be facing a very difficult time because, if we don't get certain input materials coming from other countries or if demand has collapsed in those countries for things that we export. So it's going to be very difficult for many industries. It's not going to be we wake up tomorrow or next week Thursday and everything is back to normal and as it was. A lot of companies are going to be facing very difficult times, and I suppose that's why we're seeing some of the interventions coming in from the government to support demand. Things where foodstuffs will be, poor people getting the social grants are going to help with food sales and food products. But we're also going to, as the President was saying, we're also going to have to think about how do we structure our economy going forward, because there's certain things that we exported in the past where there may not be a market in the next couple of months. And do we start building local capacity to make certain things ourselves? And similar with imports, where if we can't buy the things in global markets, do we start saying, let's start setting up businesses and employing people to start making those products in South Africa?
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Saul, for your time. In a way, I guess that really is a positive thing, because it means that people have to think out of the box. That was Saul Levin. He's the Executive Director for Trade and Industrial Policy Strategies.